According to the American Psychological Association, psychology is the scientific study of the mind and behavior. Because this definition is pretty broad, psychology has many different facets. For this project, I focused on therapy, specifically for trauma, and interviewed therapist Kelsey Sozel, LMSW. For a therapist, their day-to-day is consumed by patients and their needs, so the genres of text need to match that. Each form that comes out of a therapist's office was created with the patient's needs in mind. The first document every patient receives when visiting a therapist is the intake form. The intake form contains questions about your physical and mental health history and symptoms relating to mental health issues. Its purpose is to give the therapist a baseline of the patient's history and find out what brought them into your office. This form is filled out prior to your appointment to help the therapist create a plan. After this, depending on what treatment you need, there are many other genres of text a patient might encounter. The next one, a patient health questionnaire, is used for patients experiencing depressive symptoms. As the patient receives therapy, they complete this form every 2 weeks so that the therapist can monitor their depressive symptoms and determine if they are improving or not. The frequency of these symptoms is assigned a numerical value in the chart. The more often you experience a symptom, the higher your score. At the end of the questionnaire, the therapist totals all of the scores and uses a scale to determine the severity of their patient's depression. Because each mental health professional usually specializes in a certain field, the genre every therapist uses can look very different. Sozel is a specialist in trauma-focused treatment and practices cognitive processing therapy, or CPT, which is an evidence-based treatment for patients with trauma and PTSD symptoms. The form asks the patients to write at least 1 page on why the traumatic event occurred. The focus of this document is on the cause of the event and not the details of the traumatic event, and aims to explain why the patient believes the trauma happened. The unique thing about genres of text in the field of psychology is that their quality is determined by the patient. For example, if a patient were to lie when filling out a form, they could be leaving out a critical piece of information that could be crucial for the therapist in order to help the patient. This establishes a relationship of trust between the patient and the therapist. The patient must be truthful and open when communicating, and in turn, the patient expects the therapist to keep this information confidential. This means that there is a general understanding between the patient and the therapist that nobody but these two people will see the completed forms. The patient in this relationship has the power because the therapist can only help the patient with the information they share, and it's the patient's choice what they do share and do not share. This creates a large power struggle for the therapist because they cannot break their promise of confidentiality, but the patient has complete control of the information they divulge. The quality of a good or bad text in this scenario is dependent on how honest and communicative their patient was when filling out their form. This creates a unique issue for those in the mental health field, as their documents cannot always be taken at face value. Overall, each genre of text in the psychological field is created to gain more insight from the patient. Each document can assist the therapist in coming up with a therapeutic plan in order to best help the patient.